WWE may be at the epicenter of the pro wrestling universe in the eyes of many, but that doesn't mean they always do things better than other companies. As one example, consider the many feuds that have captivated our minds through the years. WWE has certainly cultivated a large number of compelling rivalries, as have other promotions. Sometimes WWE puts together a feud that has been done in another company, or will be done in another company. The list ahead will look at examples of other promotions getting more out of a specific rivalry than WWE did, whether it was due to creative reasons or other factors. Some entries are subjective, of course, and may be splitting hairs a little. Others, though, are undoubted and are a credit to those who build worlds outside of WWE's walls. A few honorable mentions before we start, though. Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio, Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ric Flair, Chris Benoit versus Booker T, and Drew McIntyre/Galloway versus Bobby Lashley were each negligibly equal to their non-WWE versions. The following 10, a little less so. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE feuds other promotions did better. Join us. Number 10, Kevin Steen versus El Generico. When your slugfests inspire chants of "Fight forever," there is a good chance the animosity has spanned multiple territories. Indeed, long before Kevin Owens was ruining Sami Zayn's NXT Championship moment, Kevin Steen and El Generico were ripping each other apart throughout the indies. CZW, PWG, and others have provided the world with some of Steen and Generico's most violent battles, but it was in Ring of Honor that STEEN-ERICO clashed best. The 2010 Fight Without Honor, the 2012 Ladder War, and Last Man Standing match, you are talking one of the greatest indie rivalries ever. In 2014, the renamed Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn renewed hostilities, and honestly, it's not too far off what they did in Ring of Honor and elsewhere. The NXT stuff was pretty great, but it's a little spottier on the main roster. Owens and Zayn did have that great match at Battleground in 2016, and their WrestleMania 37 battle was fun, random inclusion of Logan Paul aside. It is hard to criticize the WWE version, except to say that it lacks much of the intensity of their earlier wars. Basically, it's impossible to get Owens versus Zayn wrong, but all told, Steen versus Generico is just a teensy bit more fun. Number 9, AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura. When Shinsuke Nakamura won the 2018 Men's Royal Rumble, everybody collectively realized that Styles just so happened to be the WWE champion, and then did the math. Styles versus Nakamura for the WWE title at WrestleMania 34? WWE's going to have two men that briefly feuded in New Japan several years earlier face off for their richest prize at their biggest event? After the absolute classic they had at Wrestle Kingdom 10 for the IWGP Intercontinental title, the most excited among the fanbase were expecting comparable or exceeding greatness at Mania. And with all due respect to two of the greatest modern era wrestlers, it didn't quite work out that way. Styles and Nakamura at WrestleMania could be considered very good, but it was viewed as a disappointment against those high expectations. Styles won cleanly and somewhat abruptly, both of which surprised many, so a rueful Nakamura struck him in the nuts afterward. Nakamura's random heel turn begat a ball-bashing streak, which he carried through several more, mostly heatless pay-per-view outings with Styles, fighting to non-finishes. Styles finally ended the feud in a pretty good last man standing match at Money in the Bank, but interest had long been killed off by then. Number 8, AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe. Now, it must be said that the idea of Samoa Joe as a lifetime movie-style stalker is a curiosity in its own right. However, in his WWE title feud with Styles in 2018, it felt like an unnecessary bit of drama designed to spruce up a feud between longtime rivals. Joe's sullen and creepy recitation of "Wendy" felt like a poor table reading of the Shining script at times, but this kitschy sports entertainment approach doesn't quite compare to the simple avenue that was taken when Styles and Joe faced off in TNA over a decade earlier. Joe came into TNA as an unbeatable monster, while X Division champion Styles was the valiant David to his Goliath. Matches at Sacrifice and Turning Point are all-time classics, while their three-way match with Christopher Daniels at Unbreakable is probably TNA's greatest match ever. Granted, Styles and Joe's WWE battles weren't too far off their shared TNA standard, but the Stalker melodrama added soap opera elements where they just weren't required. Number 7, Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes. So this one may be a bit of a cheat, since the brothers Rhodes didn't exactly have a lengthy feud in AEW. They had one singles match against one another at the inaugural event, Double or Nothing. In the month prior to the event, Cody and Dustin took part in vignettes where they spelled out the extent of their occasional estrangement and how their respective professional standings fed into their uneasy divide. The build was inspired, but not as inspired as the match, where Dusty's boys put on a highly emotional 5-star epic that brought the house down in spectacular fashion. Contrast that to 4 years earlier, when Goldust and Stardust fell out with one another. There were plans to pit the brothers against each other at WrestleMania 31, but next to no compelling build and a very lukewarm match between the two at February's Fastlane killed the feud dead in its tracks. It's little surprise that over a year later, Cody would seek his release, while Dustin left in 2019, just in time for Double or Nothing. While WWE didn't know what they could have had, it is fair to say that few were expecting Cody and Dustin's fantastic finished product. Number 6, Raven vs Perry Saturn. When you see 1998 WCW do something better than 2001 WWE, your first instinct is to have a trained medical professional evaluate you for a concussion. Well, I assure you that is exactly what happened in the case of two ECW originals turned senior members of the Flock. In 1998, Saturn broke free from Raven's domineering ways and sought to liberate the more docile Flock members from Raven's spell. Months of battles came to a head at the 1998 Fall Brawl, where Saturn defeated Raven in a pretty great match where the Flock would have to disband if Raven lost. It was Saturn's biggest singles win ever. Fast forward 3 years and both men were in different places in a crowded WWE. After a bump on the head, Saturn fell in love with a mop that he named Moppy. Raven, meanwhile, was little better than a tertiary member of the Alliance, palling around with Saturn's ex, Terry Runnels. The two crossed paths in a storyline where Raven fed Moppy to a wood chipper, so Saturn beat him in a throwaway match at Unforgiven. Not the most inspired angle, and with far less emotional stakes, unless you have a mop fetish, in which case, my apologies. Number 5, Ric Flair vs Steve Austin. It is almost criminal that the world never got a proper Austin vs Flair singles feud when both were established main eventers. Had Flair actually jumped to WWE in 1998 after falling out with Eric Bischoff, we may have gotten a Stone Cold Nature Boy world title feud, but alas. The best rivalry Austin and Flair had was a brief one in WCW in 1993, when Austin and Hollywood Blonde's partner Brian Pillman mocked Flair for being old, leading to an excellent tag team title match with Flair and Arn Anderson at Clash of the Champions. That small taste of Austin vs Flair was far better than their feud on Raw in 2002. Austin wasn't at his best, as his Stone Cold character was more tame and cliched than revolutionary by this time. And speaking of cliched, Austin was given yet another authority figure to clash with as he started bullying an erstwhile accommodating Flair following a refereeing blunder at Backlash. Then Flair turned heel, then Flair stacked the deck against Austin, yada yada yada. Austin's walkout in June cut the rivalry short after one good TV match between the two, but let's face it, it wasn't either legendary figure's finest work. Number 4, Chris Jericho vs Jon Moxley. Chris Jericho and the man once known as Dean Ambrose are among the more reliable performers in the business, especially when it comes to making something silly work. But that wasn't exactly the case in 2016, when petulant heel Jericho and detached oddball Ambrose feuded over the death of a houseplant, leading to a weapons-filled cage match that managed to take the edge off of some genuinely brutal moments. Jericho does comedy well, and Ambrose can do comedy well, but there's some bad comedy that they just can't exorcise the demons out of. At the dawn of the 20s, Jericho was reigning as AEW's first world champion, and Ambrose was once more Moxley, the rebellious street fighter that backs down from no one. The two were set for a world title match at Revolution, and Jericho did all he could to derail his feisty challenger. This included offering him a spot in the Inner Circle and a car, then later trying to take Moxley's eye out with a spike. An eye patch wearing Moxley nearly blinded Jericho henchman Santana as payback and went on to defeat Jericho in a bloody battle to win the gold. I mean, that's way more fun than avenging a plant down in the mid-card, eh? Number 3, Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. For years, this was the dream match in professional wrestling. Fans debated and magazines speculated what would happen if the WWF's Hulkster and WCW's Nature Boy were to cross paths inside the squared circle. In 1991, it looked like those questions would be answered when WCW's mismanagement sent Flair on the road to New York. And it didn't take long for the Fed to set up Hogan and Flair as rivals, begging the question of who was the real world's champion. WrestleMania 8 seemed like the battleground for the historic showdown, but after a long house show run, WWE fans never got Hogan vs. Flair proper. WCW, meanwhile, was quicker to deliver the dream match on the ideal medium. Flair returned to WCW in 1993, and Hogan signed amid much hoopla in 1994. Immediately, Hogan was programmed against a heel-turned Flair for the WCW World title and beat Nate for the belt at July's Bash at the Beach. WCW did strong business from that pay-per-view foray and was apt to run Hogan vs. Flair off and on into 1999. Their WCW matches weren't always awe-inspiring, but WCW got more out of Hogan vs. Flair than WWE did, which cannot be argued. Number 2, Matt Hardy vs. Jeff Hardy. There were 3 times that the not yet broken brethren were at odds in WWE. Briefly at the end of 2001 over petty matters, a random moment in 2002 that facilitated Matt's heel turn, and their 2009 "yeah, I killed your dog and I tried to kill you as well" bit of nuttiness that was wiped away months later when the Hardys ended up on friendly terms once more, like, "sorry about the attempted murder, hey, we all make mistakes." Aside from a vastly underrated match at WrestleMania 25, Matt and Jeff never really did make magic against each other in WWE. In TNA, however, they made something that many folks consider magical, while leaving others with a bit of a migraine. Matt's inability to solve the Jeff puzzle in TNA in 2016 led him spiraling into unfathomable madness, which introduced the world to Broken Matt, an enigma like no other. Broken Matt and his cheerfully labored vocabulary challenged Brother Nero to a final deletion at the Hardy compound, which was as creative as it was absurd. And unlike their WWE matches, this got people talking, for better or for worse. The Hardys continued down this same preposterous path in TNA, and it jump-started their careers as a result. Number 1, the New World Order versus the Company. Maybe it's not exactly the same, since WWE and WCW are different promotions, but screw it, it's the same thing, same premise, and the audience had the same idea. In 1996, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, and others banded together as a malevolent, power-hungry faction that ran roughshod over WCW, scarfing up belts, TV time, and glory all the while. The opposition was the entire WCW roster, and several years of high-profile bouts were produced by this stable war. Not all of it was great, but the awesome parts are still fondly remembered today. In 2002, WWE brought back 40-something Halls, Nash, and Hogan to comprise a reborn NWO, the story being that a spiteful McMahon was going to let them kill the Federation. Except none of the chaos or drama was there. The 3 aging heavyweights just tooled around and carried out occasional attacks, but nothing as tumultuous or landscape-changing as what they did one company earlier. And hey, within a month, Hogan turned babyface in conjunction with his legendary match against The Rock. Hall, Nash, and additions Sean Waltman, Big Show, Booker T, and Shawn Michaels never felt like a big deal, and after some DVD and t-shirt sales, the New York version of the NWO faded to black and white. In more than one sense, WCW did killing their own company better than WWE did.